Okay, so in this video, we're going to get set up with our API. We're going to hit this and we're going to get a list of movies that are then going to be output correctly into our application here instead of this list that we're currently using. So to get started, you're going to need an API key from the movie database or the moviedb.org. It's free, it's not going to cost you anything, and it's a great API to explore. So I highly recommend. You're going to want to create an account and then head to your account and then head to settings and then head to API. And then we're going to get our API key. Now I'm going to cancel this account, so don't steal my API key. You're going to want this one right here, this API v3 auth. In fact, you could just copy this sample request right here and paste it into your app. But like I said, do not steal mine because I'm going to delete it anyways. Not to mention, this doesn't really charge you. It's sort of a per request thing. So they'll cut you off if a billion people are using it. And obviously you want this to work. It's a free API. Just go get your own. Okay. Now, many times you're going to want to secure your API key behind your server and do maybe some calls from your server to get this data. But like I said, since this is a free API and we're just hitting this as an experiment, we're going to hit it from the client, no problem. So let's head to our app here and let's then head to our code and let's take a look at this API. We're going to be using some fun stuff in this video if you don't know. We're going to head to app.js. And we're going to head to the app component. And inside of here, we're going to be grabbing our data. Now, if you think back to the lifecycle methods video, and you think about where in the process you'd want to grab this data, where might you think you would want to grab this data? And if you think about it, you might think, well, component will mount or the constructor, because that's when this component is being loaded up. But the reality of it is if the data does not correctly come back or it takes too long, the interface isn't going to know what to do. So what we want to do is actually have this in component did mount. So we can say component did mount. And this is the perfect place to do your API calls because the component is mounted. And therefore, we can then say, hey, go get that data right now. And if it gets here, great. And if it doesn't, we can show a loading component or something. So that might be a little bit above this series, but what we want to do now is we want to use basically the fetch API to go and grab some movies. But before we do this, I want to do it asyncly. I want to do it asynchronously. So we're going to use async await. So like I said, we're going to be using some fancy stuff in this video. We're going to be using async await. We're going to be using the fetch API, and we're going to be using an API at the MovieDB API. So if you don't know how to use any of this stuff, don't worry. I'm going to make it nice and easy. The cool thing is that with any of our methods here, these lifecycle methods, we can make them asynchronous by actually saying async. Okay, and by simply saying async before our method name, we now have access to await. Now, you'll want to typically wrap this stuff in a try and catch just in case there's any issues. So what we want to do with that is we want to say try, have some brackets, and then catch. Now, try catch isn't anything specific to async await, but it is a way to catch your errors in async await. It's actually just JavaScript. And you'll see here, we're going to try, and then we're going to catch, and catch gets an E inside of it. And since we're not doing any error handling in this, we can simply console log the error if we get one, just so we know what it is. And everything else we're going to be doing is going to be taking place inside of this try. So it's going to try to do what's in here, okay? And this is going to be a very common pattern you see in async await in the future. Now we're using async await simply because it's the latest sort of greatest way of dealing with promises, and promises are a way to make sure that this data exists. It's coming back from this API before we use it. So we're going to say we have a new constant variable named, and this will be result or res, and that's going to be equal to, and then we're going to await this fetch. We're going to fetch data from a URL. So we're going to say, hey, go off and get this information, but wait until it comes back. So fetch and then like this. Now the fetch API is great, and this is just really scratching the surface of it, but basically we're going to hit a URL, which is this API, and it's going to go and grab all that information. Now, what is this URL? Well, to find this out, we're going to head back to the movie DB, and we're going to head up to our settings here. And we're going to head all the way, let's see, all the way to the very top. It says API. It only exists when you scroll up. We can select this. And we're going to be looking for specific API documentation. And so you can get there by developers.themoviedb.org. If we come here, it's going to take us to their Great Developers page, which is something I really like. And we can come in here and we can look for something called Discover from the left-hand column. This gives us a nice way of finding a bunch of movies. Okay, so discover.movie. So the best way to get our actual URL that we're going to be using here is to click Try It Out. Now, Try It Out asks you for your API key. Like I said, don't steal mine because it's going to be gone, okay? Paste this in here, and now we have this API key. From here, we can come down all the way down and say, send request. This is going to do a send test request, and if your API key is valid, what you should see here, if we check this out, is basically a bunch of data involving movies. Like, I'm going to skip Minions, but Blade Runner 2049 and War of the Planet of the Apes, it's a bunch of information, right? But just above that is our send request button right here, which is the URL that we're going to want to use. So just go ahead and copy this entire URL. It contains your API key as well as everything that will result in this data coming back. If you're not seeing this right now, this data, it's not going to work in the app. So make sure that you have your API key pasted in here correctly and that you have this here and that you're copying this URL directly. Okay, so now that we have that, let's paste this in our fetch. I'm going to make an open string here and just paste this in. So let me finish this off with a semicolon, and let me remove that so we can see this a little bit better. You can see we have this big old long URL that we're fetching, and we're going to go grab all of that same data that it showed us in the preview. This is what mine looks like, okay? And so let's scroll back over here, and that is going to be saved into res. Now, what's up with res? Well, we actually need one more thing from res. We need to make sure that the entire data is here. So what we want to do is we want to say const movies is going to be equal to, and then we're going to await once more, and we're going to do res.json. And this is a method here, so we need the parentheses. So this is going to actually get us all of these movies. So this const.movies right here is going to be the same as this information. We can test that out simply by saying CLG, console log, whatever, movies. Okay? Save this. Let's head to our app, and let's head inside of our React app. And just like that, it's super cool. All the data is already here, and you can see we have a page, total pages, results, and we have results with actual movie data in it. And sure enough, I accidentally opened up Minions first. Great. Okay. So you can see here, this is really simple. And like I mentioned before, if you were getting this URL correct, then all you need to do is await fetch and await res.json. Now, this is by no means the complete course on async await. There's a lot of stuff here, but we used async to say, hey, we're hitting an API, and we're going to wait until this information comes back, and then we're going to get the JSON from it, the actual data, and then we have our movies. So what can we do with our movies? Well, you might think, hey, well, let's use these as props somehow. Well, how are we getting them out of component mount? Well, the best way to do this at this point is to set it to state. So we can say this dot set state. And remember, set state is a method that accepts a function. And inside of here, we can say movies is equal to, and then movies. But we don't just want the entire object. What we just want is the actual array of movies. So if you notice here, that actually exists not within movies, but movies.results. So movies.results. Cool. So this is now our movies being set into state. So this is really super fancy and nice, and if you are familiar with React dev tools, you'll be able to confirm that this data already exists. However, we haven't gone over that yet, so don't worry. If you want to confirm that this exists, this component's going to re-render when the state is set, so we can come into our render command, and we can just console log this.state.movies. Okay? Like this. And if we head to our app, you're going to see we get a big old fat error that says, hey, man, movies or state doesn't exist. And we're getting a whole bunch of errors basically because we're trying to read the property movies on state that doesn't exist. So how can we make state exist if we haven't defined anything in state for this component? Well, we can come up top here and we can set a default state, which is something you'll often want to do. So you can say state is equal to an object, and the property inside of our state, which was movies that we're trying to access, well, this can be equal to just a blank array, because if the data doesn't come in, well, it's just a blank array, and that way you could check to say, hey, if this array's length is equal to -1 or whatever, then display some sort of text that says the data isn't here yet, or maybe some loading information. But either way, now when it tries to access this .state, obviously the state is being created when the component's being created, so it's not going to give you that error that says, hey, this thing doesn't exist. So check it out. Our current movies are loading up, and that's fine. But what's even cooler is that first we can see on initial render, our state is set to nothing, right? It's a blank array. But then after it grabs the data, our component re-renders and is now giving us an array of a bunch of objects. Inside of these objects is all of our information. Now, the coolest thing here is that we already used the word title, so the movie.title is still going to be correct. So with one fell swoop, we'll be able to replace all of these with these new movies. In addition, we also have an ID, which is a unique identifier for these movies. So that satisfies the requirements of our movie.map here anyways. So I'm going to get rid of this description thing because we don't need it anymore. I'm just going to bounce that out. And in movies, again, I'm going to just eliminate that this ever existed, like this and like this. Like this. Okay, so we now have our movie.title, and our movie.title is the only thing in here. Inside of app.js, we're simply just passing in a movie.id as well as a movie. So what would you expect to be the only thing we have to change here to get our movies output? Let's check it out. The only thing we need to change here to output our movies is right here on this map. Let's copy this .state.movies and remove this console log. And in place of movies, which was a constant variable we defined up top here, we can replace that with this .state.movies, which we saw was our big old array. Save this. Let's, for fun, just delete these constant movies because extra code sitting around, no good. Okay. This .state.movies.map, output each movie goes into the movie component. Inside of the movie component, we're simply just using movie.title. And again, movie.id only works because there is an ID property on each movie. Head back and boom, check it out. This is really exciting because all of this data is coming from an API. And if we were to pass in a different path that output a bunch of different movies based on some sort of search or something, it would give us a whole bunch of different data, and our current application is going to work no matter what. So in this video, we've done a whole lot of stuff, so I'm not going to get into anything more just yet. However, we are going to get this looking a lot better than just a bunch of text output like this, right? But let's go over everything that we did inside of our app. First and foremost, we set up our API and we got this API path. Next, we learned about async await a little bit. Like I mentioned, async await is a deeper topic that allows us to have code that waits for things, essentially, is the easiest way to put that, right? And we could use async just by adding async in front of component did mount. Now, I should mention it's important to note that nearly most of the time you use component did mount, you don't need to put async in here. And in fact, if you were using callbacks or you were using promises, you wouldn't have async in here. So it's going to be not super common to see that. But in this instance, it makes sense and it's forward thinking, so it's definitely something you're going to want to learn here. So our try catch is just making sure we have no errors. We're going to try this batch of code, and if it doesn't work, output some sort of error. Inside of our try catch, we're simply grabbing a bunch of data from this fetch. However, we need to again wait for the JSON to be ready with res.json. You would do the same thing with promises. Await just waits for this to complete before moving on to the next step, right? So you can't use .json if this step isn't complete. Next, we're simply just setting our state to the movies.results, which .results was simply just a property on that object. Next, we're simply just iterating over that array and outputting that information into our movie component. And here we have something that's really super nice. Every single time you refresh it, it's fast, right? So this is just really super cool. We're now hitting an API. We're now getting some data in here, and you can use the same pattern all the time for any kind of API that works this way. So in the next couple of videos, we're going to be getting this thing looking a lot nicer. We're going to be adding in our cover art for these images. We're going to be adding in some style to it. We're going to be exploring some techniques, and we're going to be getting into routing really super quickly. And then along the way, we're going to be getting into some stuff to make your life a lot easier when working with React. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.